A waif of a girl, barely 6 years old, cradled a baby in her arms, begging for help outside a swanky restaurant on Fifth Avenue. Shivering in the cold, her feet grimy and clothes tattered, she caught the eye of a millionaire stepping out of his Rolls-Royce. He scanned her up and down, then burst into laughter. What followed would forever change both their destinies. Subscribe to our channel for heartwarming stories delivered daily. The golden reflections of the five-star restaurant spilled onto the marble sidewalk like fingers of light reaching for the darkness. There, at the edge of luxury and destitution, the little girl stood frozen. She was only 6, but her eyes held the weight of decades. She clutched a baby against her emaciated chest, shielding him from the biting wind whipping down the avenue. The autumn chill seeped through her threadbare clothes, making her tremble as she extended a small, dirty hand to the stylish patrons entering and exiting the establishment. Most averted their gaze, as if the sight of a child in need was an unwanted stain on the perfect picture of their privileged lives. Inside the restaurant, the millionaire was finishing his $300 meal. The saffron risotto with black truffles he'd barely touched lay forgotten as he discussed acquiring yet another company on the phone. His empire grew daily, as did the emptiness in his chest, a chasm no amount of money could fill. Close. "The deal by tomorrow, I don't care what it costs," he barked, hanging up impatiently. He adjusted his bespoke suit and signaled the valet to bring his Rolls-Royce. As he waited at the entrance, his eyes fell upon the diminutive figure of the girl. Something about her bothered him deeply, perhaps her frailty, perhaps her silent persistence. The girl looked directly at him, without pleading or pretense, only the raw sincerity of someone who had nothing left to lose. The car arrived, majestic and imposing as its owner. The millionaire adjusted his cufflinks, displaying a watch that cost more than many people earned in years. That's when the girl approached, still holding the baby. "Please, mister, for my little brother," she whispered, her voice so soft it mingled with the roar of passing traffic. Something in the millionaire's face shifted, a shadow of disdain, followed by a scornful smile that grew into laughter. A loud, theatrical laugh that drew the attention of those nearby and contorted his face into a mask of cruelty. "Starting young in the mommy game, huh? You'll end up just like your mother, with a bunch of kids and not a dime to your name," he sneered, deliberately raising his voice so other patrons could hear. Some laughed along, others averted their gaze in embarrassment, silent accomplices to the humiliation. The restaurant doorman lowered his head, pretending not to see the degrading scene. The girl didn't cry or recoil. She just hugged the baby tighter against her chest and stared at the millionaire with something he'd never seen in someone so small and helpless. Dignity. Silently, she walked away, disappearing into the night like a shadow among shadows, carrying the baby and an invisible burden of pain. The millionaire watched her go, the laughter dying on his lips, replaced by an uncomfortable feeling that he quickly drowned with the promise of another glass of champagne at the party he would attend. That night, as the luxury car sped away, leaving behind the illuminated restaurant, a woman watched the entire scene from afar. Her eyes followed the girl disappearing between the buildings, and then watched the millionaire's car vanish in the opposite direction. On her face, a determined expression formed. That night, two paths diverged, but fate was already beginning to weave the invisible threads that would one day bring them back together, face to face. Days after that encounter, the millionaire had already turned the scene into an anecdote. He recounted at dinner parties and social gatherings, always provoking uncomfortable laughter from his captive audience. You should have seen her little face. Looked like she'd been living on the streets her whole life, but she couldn't have been more than 6, he'd say, swirling his wine glass between his fingers as the guests in his triplex penthouse laughed politely. That night, After everyone had left, he remained on the panoramic balcony, contemplating the city stretching out beneath him. Lights twinkled like artificial stars, while the true ones were obscured by light pollution. A perfect metaphor for his life, full of intense glitz, but incapable of revealing the more subtle and true beauty. What the millionaire didn't know was that while he was sipping his rare cognac in another part of the city, the girl he had humiliated was facing a radical transformation in her life. The social worker walked through the corridors of the temporary shelter, holding the hand of the girl who still clutched the baby to her chest, reluctant to hand him over to anyone. "No one will separate you, I promise," the woman assured her, the same one who had witnessed the scene at the restaurant and followed the girl discreetly. "But we need to take care of both of you. You and your little brother need a safe place." The girl's eyes, still wary, studied every detail of the environment, searching for escape routes, assessing dangers. Typical behavior for someone who had learned to survive on the streets from a young age. "What's your name?" the social worker asked. The girl hesitated, as if her own name was a secret too valuable to share. "Does it matter?" she finally replied, with a painful wisdom beyond her years. The next day, the millionaire was immersed in strategic meetings for his newest acquisition, a failing chain of luxury hotels that he would buy for a fraction of their real value. His advisors presented charts and projections, but his mind wandered, momentarily captured by the image of the girl from the night before. "Sir, do you agree with the strategy?" He blinked, returning to the reality of the meeting room. "Of course. Fire half the employees and replace them with contractors. Cut the benefits of those who stay. We need profit in the first quarter." The cold efficiency of his decisions was admired in the market. "Ruthless genius," they called him in business. Magazines which frequently featured him on the cover, always alone, always impeccable, always impenetrable. Back at the shelter, the girl finally allowed them to examine the baby. The volunteer doctor assessed the little one carefully. "He's dehydrated and a little malnourished, but you've taken very good care of him. You're a very brave little girl," he said, with genuine admiration. The social worker watched the interaction with growing interest. It was evident that the bond between the siblings transcended their circumstances. The girl, even so young, displayed a fierce devotion to the baby. "Where's your mom?" she asked gently. Silence was the answer. The girl just clutched a small, worn cloth bag she carried with her, as if it held a priceless treasure. That same afternoon, the millionaire signed the contract for the acquisition of the hotel chain. Cameras flashed, capturing his calculated smile, his firm handshake, his dominant posture. Another victory for his empire. A few more million for his fortune that he could no longer accurately count. In his heart, however, a discomfort persisted. A small pebble in the shoe of his conscience. The image of the girl and her gaze. It wasn't the poverty or helplessness that disturbed him. He'd seen enough misery to have developed calluses on his soul. It was that look, the silent dignity. Annoyed with his own digression, he dismissed his chauffeur and drove his own car through the city streets, as if he could leave that feeling behind with speed. On an impulse, he returned to the restaurant from the night before. He questioned the doorman, who denied having seen the girl again. "These urchins are like that, sir. They show up, cause trouble, and disappear," the employee commented, trying to please. The millionaire nodded, trying to ignore the inexplicable disappointment he felt. Meanwhile, miles away, the girl wrapped her brother in a clean blanket for the first time in weeks. In the small cloth bag, she carefully kept a letter, the last thing her mother had left her before passing away. 7 years passed. The millionaire's life expanded like a supernova, consuming everything around it. His empire crossed borders, diversified into sectors that even he couldn't fully keep track of. His fortune quadrupled. His name became synonymous with relentless success. On the outside, he was the personification of triumph. On the inside, loneliness dug ever deeper tunnels. 3 failed marriages, all carefully protected by ironclad prenuptial agreements. No children, no true friends, just satellites orbiting his resources, ready to change orbit as soon as the gravity of money diminished. In his oceanfront mansion, the millionaire contemplated the infinite horizon, holding a glass of wine that cost more than most people earned in a month. That morning, his image consulting team had suggested something different. "You need to soften your public image," explained the director of public relations. "The latest acquisitions have generated a lot of layoffs, and public perception is negative. We need a convincing humanitarian initiative." The millionaire laughed with disdain. "Since when do I care what the public thinks?" "Since it started affecting the value of your stock," she replied without hesitation, sliding a chart in his direction. The proposal was to create a charitable foundation, something geared towards children in vulnerable situations. The irony did not go unnoticed by the millionaire, although he would never admit that he still remembered the girl from the restaurant. That specific memory had been carefully buried under layers of cultivated indifference. "Do whatever you want. Just don't take up too much of my time with it," he authorized with a dismissive gesture. In another part of the city, in a modest neighborhood, the girl, now 13 years old, carefully closed her 7-year-old brother's backpack, checking if he had packed all his school supplies. "Did you do your math homework?" she asked, smoothing the boy's hair. The boy nodded, smiling with the pride of someone who had just mastered the 6 times table. He didn't remember life on the streets, nor the first months in the shelter. His oldest memory was of the day they moved into that small house, accompanied by the woman who had taken them in and later become their legal guardian. "She said she's picking us up from school today," the boy commented, referring to the guardian who worked at a social organization. The girl smiled, keeping her apprehension to herself. She knew that the guardian rarely changed her routine, unless there was something important to communicate, and she was old enough to understand the precariousness of their situation, the subsidies they received, the social grants. Everything could be lost at any moment. The fear of separation never completely abandoned her. In the executive suite of his corporate skyscraper, the millionaire signed the documents formalizing the creation of the New Pathways Foundation, dedicated to promoting opportunities for young people in vulnerable situations. Empty words drafted by his marketing team, substantial amounts earmarked for tax write-offs. A strategic photo would be taken later with some carefully selected smiling children. "We're organizing a launch event in 2 weeks," his advisor informed him. "We'll invite the press, authorities, potential partners, and some grassroots social organizations for legitimacy." The millionaire barely listened, his attention divided between the contract clauses and the display of urgent messages on his cell phone. "Whatever, I'll only be there for the official photos," he replied, without looking up from the documents. Back at school, the girl and her brother found the guardian waiting at the gate with an expression that mixed excitement and apprehension. "I received an extraordinary invitation today," she revealed as they walked together. "Our organization has been selected to participate in the launch of a new foundation, a Millionaire initiative." The girl listened with polite attention, more concerned with the guardian's expression than with her words. "The most surprising thing," the woman continued, "is that they want one of our kids to make a short speech about overcoming adversity, hope, those things." She stopped, looking directly at the girl. "I thought of you," she said finally. "You're our most inspiring story." The girl felt a chill run down her spine, without understanding exactly why. She nodded mechanically, while an inexplicable premonition began to form within her. That night, after everyone was asleep, she took the old cloth bag where she kept her mother's letter. She reread the faded words, tracing with her fingers the lines of a revelation she carried in secret. Two worlds that had distanced themselves now began imperceptibly to converge again. The following week, the grand ballroom of the Excelsior Hotel transformed into a monument to ostentatious philanthropy. Lavish floral arrangements, strategic lighting, and a newly created logo decorated the space where the new Pathways Foundation would launch. The guest list mixed the city's financial elite, influential politicians, celebrities engaged in social causes, and, almost as a prop, representatives from organizations that actually worked with vulnerable children. The millionaire rehearsed his speech in the makeshift dressing room, annoyed by the number of commitments this initiative was generating. His advisor adjusted the blue tie specially chosen to convey trustworthiness. "Remember to look touched when you talk about the children," she instructed. "And please, try to smile in the photos this time." He rolled his eyes, observing his own image in the mirror. The man staring back at him seemed like a stranger, impeccably dressed, perfectly empty. "How long do I need to stay here?" he asked, checking his platinum watch. "At least until the cocktail hour, after the girl from the partner organization gives her speech," the advisor replied, checking the schedule. "She's a 13-year-old who has a moving story. She was rescued from the streets and now helps other children. Exactly the kind of narrative we need to associate with the foundation." In another part of the hotel, the girl waited nervously, with her guardian and little brother wearing a simple navy dress borrowed for the occasion. Her eyes scanned the sumptuous environment with a mixture of fascination and suspicion. "There are so many important people here," the guardian murmured, leafing through the event program. "It's a unique opportunity for visibility for our organization. Are you ready for your speech?" The girl nodded silently. She had memorized the suggested words, but secretly she planned to say others. For days, after discovering who was the millionaire behind the foundation, she had struggled with a storm of emotions. Chance, or was it fate, had again placed in her path the man who had humiliated her 7 years ago. The man who, unknowingly, had a much deeper connection with her and her brother. The event began with the expected pomp and circumstance. Predictable speeches from authorities, carefully produced institutional videos, polite applause. The millionaire sat in the front row, flanked by strategic partners, all displaying rehearsed smiles for the cameras that did not stop recording that spectacle of good intentions. When it was time for his own speech, he took the stage with the confidence of someone accustomed to dominating any environment. He spoke about corporate social responsibility, about the duty to give back to society, about believing in the potential of new generations. Words that sounded good, although they had never echoed in his real actions. "And now," announced the Master of Ceremonies, "we have the honor of hearing the testimony of a young woman whose trajectory embodies exactly the mission of our new foundation. A story of overcoming adversity that is sure to touch everyone." The girl walked onto the stage with measured steps, carrying a dignity that contrasted with her age. She faced the audience for a few moments, locating her brother and her guardian in the middle rows. Then her eyes met those of the millionaire in the front row. Something in that look made the businessman fidget in his chair, suddenly uncomfortable without understanding why. There was something vaguely familiar about that girl, something that provoked an unsettling tingle in his memory. The girl adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. "The man who laughed at me when I was just a dirty child on the sidewalk is sitting in the front row, and today I came to thank him. The hall plunged into absolute silence, dense as concrete. The millionaire felt the blood freeze in his veins. Recognition and horror mixed in his face as fragments of the memory of that night resurfaced with brutal clarity. 7 years ago, I was at the door of a restaurant, holding my baby brother, asking for help to feed him. She continued, with a surprisingly firm voice. You got out of your fancy car, looked at me, and laughed. You joked about my mother, about my future. Cameras swerved from the institutional slides and focused on the increasingly pale face of the millionaire. His advisor tried discreetly to signal to interrupt the girl, but it was too late. That same night, a woman who watched everything followed us. She took us to a shelter. Later, she became our guardian. Thanks to her, I was able to study. I was able to take care of my brother. And today, I volunteer at the same organization that took me in. The audience, initially shocked, began to absorb the unexpected narrative with a mixture of embarrassment and fascination. Some disapproving glances went to the millionaire, who suddenly seemed smaller in his expensive chair. So, yes, I came to thank you, the girl continued, with an intense gleam in her eye, because that humiliation gave me a purpose. The pain turned into strength, and today I run a project that helps children who are where I was. The guardian watched open-mouthed, never having heard that version of the story. The little brother looked admiringly at the courageous figure of his sister on the stage, not fully understanding what was unfolding, but feeling the importance of the moment. The millionaire, for the first time in decades, found himself truly speechless, exposed in a way that no corporate adversary had ever managed. However, something beyond embarrassment began to stir within him. A deeper unease, an urgency to understand that unexpected connection with his past. At that moment, two worlds that had collided briefly 7 years before came together again, this time in a confrontation that neither side could escape unscathed. And this was just the surface of an even deeper truth waiting to be revealed. The silence that followed the girl's speech was broken by a hesitant applause that gradually grew into a standing ovation. The audience, moved by a mixture of shock, admiration, and that peculiar kind of pity that likes to dress itself in solidarity, rose almost in unison. The only one who remained seated was the millionaire. His face had transitioned from pale to red and now settled on an expression impossible to decipher. It was as if all the masks he had cultivated over the years had been ripped off simultaneously, leaving him naked before a truth he could no longer deny. His advisor leaned in, whispering urgently in his ear, "Stand up, smile, turn this into something positive. Now." Mechanically, he rose. He applauded. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Decades of training in corporate environments allowed him to navigate the moment with a minimum of outward dignity, while internally an earthquake was reshaping his reality. The girl, in turn, gave a small bow and left the stage the same way she had entered, with measured steps and head held high. When she returned to her seat, she was embraced by her guardian, who had tears in her eyes and a million questions on her lips. The event continued with a certain awkwardness. The ensuing cocktail hour was populated by hushed conversations, furtive glances in the direction of the millionaire, and theories about the authenticity of that surprising story. The businessman kept to a corner of the room, surrounded by advisors who were trying to create a protective barrier around him, while he drank one whiskey after another, his eyes fixed on the girl on the other side of the room. "We need to get out of here," insisted the head of security. "No," he replied dryly, "I need to talk to her." The advisor shook her head. "Not now. We'll manage this later more calmly. The press is—" "I don't care about the press," the millionaire cut in a tone that brooked no argument. "Bring her here, now!" On the other side of the room, the girl watched the commotion around the businessman, holding her little brother's hand as if she feared he might disappear at any moment. "What you did was very brave," said the Guardian, still processing the revelation. "But why did you never tell me it was him?" The girl shrugged with a maturity that transcended her age. "Because it didn't matter who he was. It mattered what happened after." At that moment, one of the Millionaire's advisors approached, with a professional smile that did not hide the nervousness. "Mr. would like to speak with you in private, if possible." The Guardian immediately assumed a protective posture. "I see. No reason to—" "It's okay," interrupted the girl, surprising everyone. "Let's talk." They were led to a small adjacent room used for executive meetings. The Millionaire was already there, alone, standing by the window that offered a panoramic view of the city. When the door closed, he turned, slowly. For the first time in 7 years, they were face to face, without audiences, without masks, only the raw truth of the past between them. "You have a lot of courage," he said finally, with a voice that sounded strangely vulnerable. The girl remained silent, studying the man in front of her. He was no longer the intimidating giant of her childhood memories. He was just a man, rich and powerful, yes, but also visibly shaken and somehow smaller than she remembered. "Why did you do that?" asked the Millionaire, disconcerted by his own need to understand. "Why expose me like that after all this time?" "It wasn't to expose you," she replied calmly. "It was because I believe people can change, even people like you." The simplicity of the answer completely disarmed him. He looked away, unable to sustain the weight of those young but old eyes. "What happened to your mother?" he asked, trying to fill in the gaps in the story. A heavy silence settled in the room. The girl exchanged a meaningful look with the Guardian, then looked at her little brother, who was watching everything with childish curiosity. "She died," she replied finally, "shortly after giving birth to my brother." Something in the way she spoke those words made the Millionaire shudder. A suspicion began to form in his mind, a possibility so disturbing that he could barely process it. "And the father?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. The girl held her brother's hand more firmly. "My mother worked as a house cleaner in wealthy families' homes. She had a relationship with one of her employers. When she got pregnant, she was fired. He never knew about the baby. Or, if he knew, he didn't care." Each word was like a sharp blade, piercing the Millionaire's armor. Fragmented memories began to emerge. A discreet employee in one of his properties, a brief involvement, a dismissal delegated to managers when the property was sold. "Her name," he began, unable to complete the question. The Guardian, perceiving the growing tension, intervened. "I think we've talked enough for today. The children need to go home." The Millionaire nodded mechanically, still processing the whirlwind of revelations and suspicions. When they were about to leave, however, the girl turned around. "I have something to show you, but not here. Not now." He stared at her, feeling simultaneously the most powerful and the most impotent man in the world. "When?" he asked simply. "Tomorrow, at the city park, near the lake, at 4 in the afternoon." The Guardian looked worried but did not interfere. Something in that exchange made her understand that there was much more at stake than she understood. When they left, the Millionaire remained motionless, staring at the view of the city that he could no longer see, lost in the implications of what he had just discovered. The city park, normally a haven of tranquility, seemed to vibrate with tension that afternoon. The Millionaire arrived 15 minutes before the agreed time, dismissing his driver and security, wearing discreet clothes that contrasted with his usual ostentatious style. He sat on a bench near the lake, watching families, couples, and loners, who enjoyed that democratic space without knowing that a few feet away one of the richest people in the country, was waiting, his heart racing like a teenager. His advisor had almost collapsed when he announced that he would have this meeting. "This is crazy," she had argued. "We don't know who these people are. They may be planning some kind of extortion. We need lawyers, confidentiality agreements, security." For the first time in years, he had refused the strategic advice of his team. Something deeper than money, more essential than public image, compelled him to this meeting. An almost physical need to know the truth. Exactly at 4 o'clock. The girl appeared, alone this time. She walked with the same silent dignity that characterized her, carrying a small document folder. She sat next to him on the bench, leaving between them a physical space that symbolized the abyss that separated their worlds. "Thank you for coming," said the millionaire, surprised at his own gratitude. The girl nodded, observing the lake for a few moments before speaking. "My guardian doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I went to the library." "Why the secrecy?" "Because what I have to show you is something that not even she knows, something my mother left only for me." With reverent care, the girl opened the folder and removed a yellowed envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter and a photograph. She extended both to the millionaire, who received them with slightly trembling hands. The photograph showed a young woman of simple beauty and a shy smile, holding a newborn baby. In the background, he recognized part of the decor from one of his old properties. "Elena," he murmured, the name surfacing from the depths of his memory like a castaway gasping for air. The girl watched him intently. "You remember her?" It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Yes. She worked at my country house for, I don't know, maybe a year. We had a brief involvement." 3 months, according to the letter, the girl corrected with painful precision. It was enough. The millionaire averted his gaze from the photograph to the letter. The delicate handwriting narrated a story he had never known. The despair after the dismissal, the discovery of the pregnancy, the birth of the child, the struggle to survive with a small daughter and a newborn, the illness that gradually consumed her. In the last lines, the revelation that made his world completely collapse. "My dear daughter, keep this truth until you are ready to use it. Your little brother is the son of the man I worked for. He never knew, never bothered to find out. But his blood runs in my little one's veins. It is not a burden I place on you, but a right that belongs to your brother. When the time comes, you will know what to do. With all my love, your mother." The millionaire felt the air leave his lungs. He looked at the girl, then back at the photograph, searching and finding familiar traces in the baby, who was now a 7-year-old boy. "My son," he whispered, the reality of those words hitting him like an avalanche. "And you are your stepdaughter," she completed, with an impressive composure for someone so young. "Daughter from my mother's previous relationship. But my brother is your biological son." The world around him seemed to have slowed down. The hum of the park, the wind in the trees, the movement of the little boats on the lake, all became a distant backdrop to the revolution that was taking place inside the millionaire. "Why now?" he finally managed to ask. "Why look for me after all this time?" The girl carefully gathered the letter and photograph, returning them to the folder. "I didn't look for you. It was coincidence. Or fate. When I learned that your foundation had invited our organization, I thought about refusing. But then I thought about my brother, about his right to know his father, about how I would feel if someone had hidden that from me." She paused, choosing the next words carefully. "And I also thought about you." The millionaire raised his eyebrows, surprised. "About me?" "Yes. About the man who laughed at a hungry child. About the businessman who fired my pregnant mother without a second thought. About the millionaire who never had to face the consequences of his actions. Her voice remained calm, without accusation, just stating facts. "I thought that maybe knowing your son could, I don't know, make a difference." The impact of those sincere words was greater than any angry accusation could have been. It was as if the girl had, with a few sentences, exposed all the emptiness of his existence. "I want to meet him," said the millionaire, with an urgency that surprised him. "My son. I want to get to know him better. I want to be part of his life. Of both of your lives." The girl shook her head slowly. "It's not that simple. I can give you everything. A better house, the best education, trips, opportunities. "We don't want your money," she interrupted with surprising firmness. "It's not about that." "What is it about then?" The girl looked him directly in the eyes with a wisdom that transcended her age. "About dignity, about respect, about being the kind of person that my brother can admire, not just fear or envy." The millionaire felt the weight of those words like a lead cloak on his shoulders. For the first time in decades, he found himself confronted not with adversaries he could buy, intimidate, or overcome, but with a simple and impossible to ignore moral truth. "What do you want from me then?" he asked, genuinely lost. "I want you to change," the girl replied simply. "Not just in appearance, not just for the cameras or for your public image. Change for real. Start by recognizing your mistakes, not just with me and my brother, but with everyone you've hurt along the way." The silence that followed was as profound as an abyss. On the horizon, the first stars began to dot the sky, silent witnesses to that moment of truth. "I don't know if I can," he admitted finally, with an honesty he hadn't demonstrated in years. The girl stood up, adjusting her simple school uniform. "That's the difference between us. I always knew I could survive, even when I had nothing. You have everything, but you don't know if you can simply be better." She started to walk away, then stopped and turned around. "Tomorrow we'll be in the park again, my brother and I. If you want to meet us, we'll be near the carousel at 3. If you don't come, we'll understand, and we won't look for you again." The millionaire watched her leave, feeling simultaneously the richest and the poorest man in the world. That night, the millionaire couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, the insomnia wasn't due to corporate strategies or the next multi-million-dollar acquisition. It was his life, or what he had made of it, that kept him awake, staring at the ceiling of his presidential suite as if he could find answers there. The revelation that he had a son, a 7-year-old child who had grown up in poverty while he accumulated absurd wealth, seemed like a stroke of fate to expose the total moral bankruptcy of his existence. Even worse was confronting the fact that on the fateful night at the restaurant, he had laughed at his own adopted daughter, yes, adopted in his heart, if not legally, who was holding his biological son in her arms. The cruelty of the coincidence was almost literary. In another part of the city, in a small 2-bedroom apartment, the girl also remained awake, sitting on the edge of her brother's bed, watching him sleep. The boy smiled in his dreams, oblivious to the upheavals that were shaking the fragile balance she had so carefully built to protect him. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked in a whisper to the mother who could no longer answer. The next day, the millionaire cancelled all appointments, something unthinkable in his usual routine. He dismissed the limousine and the driver. He dressed as simply as possible for someone whose wardrobe did not contain a single piece that cost less than a minimum wage. His advisor called 17 times. On the 18th, he finally answered. "Where are you?" she demanded, her voice sharp with concern. "We have the meeting with the Chinese investors in an hour, the press conference about the foundation right after that, and the dinner with the governor." "Cancel everything," he interrupted. "What, have you lost your mind?" Those appointments were scheduled months ago, and after the fiasco at the event yesterday, we urgently need to control the damage. Cancel, he repeated with an unusual calm. Say I'm sick, that I had a family. Emergency, make up whatever you want. Family emergency, you don't have any family, she retorted, exasperated. The words hit him with unexpected force. Maybe that's the problem, he replied, before hanging up the phone and switching it off completely. At 3 o'clock sharp, he was at the park near the carousel, watching from afar as the girl and the little boy arrived. Seeing them together, now knowing the truth, caused him a strange sensation, like recognizing something precious that had always been before his eyes, but that he had never been able to see. The boy was excited, skipping and pointing at the colorful horses of the carousel. The girl held his hand with that mixture of protection and gentleness that characterized their relationship. A simple scene that somehow contained more truth than all the artificial existence the millionaire had built for himself. As he approached, the boy was the first to notice him. "Look!" he exclaimed, pointing. "It's the man on TV, from the foundation." The girl turned, her expression neutral, although her eyes revealed a cautious hope. "You came," she stated simply. The millionaire nodded, feeling strangely nervous. "Can we talk?" She looked at her brother, who was still skipping, eager to get on the carousel. "He's been looking forward to this ride all week. We can go together," suggested the millionaire, surprising himself. When was the last time he had ridden a carousel? Had it been in childhood, before money and power became the only carousels he allowed himself to spin on? The boy looked at him with childish curiosity. "You're going to ride too?" "If your sister lets me," he replied, meeting the girl's gaze, with a look that asked for more than just permission for a simple ride. She hesitated for only an instant. "All right, but we'll talk later, alone." The three joined the line, a curious image for any casual observer. The executive clearly out of place in his expensive sweater, the 13-year-old girl with her precocious dignity, and the animated little boy who, unknowingly, was the biological link between such distant worlds. When it was their turn, the boy chose a white horse with golden details. The girl positioned herself next to him on a red steed. The millionaire, after a moment of hesitation, mounted a black horse, feeling absurdly large and awkward on the children's ride. The old music started, the carousel spun, and for a few magical minutes the complications of the adult world dissolved. The boy laughed openly, the girl allowed herself a discreet smile, and the millionaire experienced something he had long forgotten, the simple joy of a present moment, without calculations, without strategies, without masks. When the ride ended and they dismounted, the millionaire realized that he was genuinely smiling. The boy looked at him with childish fascination. "You have a really cool watch," the boy commented, pointing to the accessory that, even being the most discreet the millionaire possessed, still cost more than a used car. "Thank you," he replied, before adding impulsively, "Want to try it on?" The boy's eyes widened. The girl started to protest, but before she could intervene, the millionaire had already taken off the watch and was extending it to the little one, who received it as if it were a magical treasure. "It's so heavy!" he exclaimed, laughing as he saw the gigantic object on his tiny wrist. It was a simple moment, but it captured something deeply significant. The man who had built his identity around possessions, allowing himself, perhaps for the first time, to share instead of accumulate. The girl watched the scene with a complex expression, alert but also touched by the spontaneous interaction. "He wants an ice cream," she said, indicating a nearby stand. "Can you stay with him for a minute while I buy it?" The question carried enormous weight, and they both knew it. It was a small test of trust, a minimal but significant opening. "Of course," replied the millionaire, feeling the weight of responsibility like something physical on his shoulders. When the girl walked away, he sat on a nearby bench, watching the boy play with the watch, turning the hands, admiring how the light reflected on the metallic surface. "What's your name?" the boy asked suddenly, raising his big, curious eyes. The question, so simple, hit the millionaire with unexpected force. This little boy, his biological son, didn't even know his name. He introduced himself, feeling the strangeness of formalities between a father and son who should share intimacy and history. "Do you know my sister?" continued the boy, with the naturalness of childhood. "Yes," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "We've known each other for a while. She's very special." The boy nodded vigorously. "She's the bravest person in the world. She's taken care of me forever. She says our mom was an angel who went back to heaven." The innocent words struck the millionaire like precise arrows. This little boy had grown up an orphan without a mother and without a father. Not because the latter was dead or missing, but because he had been too busy accumulating wealth and power to notice the existence of his own son. When the girl returned with the ice creams, she found the two talking animatedly. The girl looked out the window, watching her brother playing in the schoolyard with other boys, his innocent laughter audible even from a distance. "I want him to have a chance to know his father," she replied finally. "But I also want the father to deserve to know him." That night, the millionaire made a decision that would shock the corporate world. He called an extraordinary board meeting for the following morning, instructing that all key executives and advisors be present. When everyone gathered in the imposing boardroom on the top floor of the skyscraper that bore his name, they found him unusually calm, almost serene, a remarkable change for a man known for his intimidating temper. "For the past 15 years, he began, silencing the room with his decisive voice, "we have built an empire based on a simple principle: maximize profits at any cost. We fired without hesitation, acquired companies to dismantle them, ignored environmental impacts, circumvented labor regulations." The executives exchanged confused glances. This was not the typical motivational speech from their leader. "Starting today, that changes," he continued, handing each of them an extensive document. "This is the group's new corporate code of conduct. It includes increased wages for entry-level employees, expanded benefits, binding environmental commitments, and the creation of a significant fund for repairing communities negatively impacted by our past operations." The chief financial officer flipped through the document with growing horror. "This will cost billions. The shareholders will massacre us." "Probably," agreed the millionaire with a calmness that disconcerted everyone. "I will also announce a restructuring of leadership. I'm stepping down from the position of CEO to assume the chairmanship of the board, with an exclusive focus on overseeing this ethical transformation." The room exploded in protests. The corporate lawyer stood up, red with indignation. "You can't do this. There are contracts, fiduciary obligations, commitments to investors." "I can and I will," the millionaire replied simply. "I still have majority control of the shares. If anyone doesn't agree with the new direction, they are free to leave, with a fair severance package, of course." As the meeting continued in controlled chaos, he watched through the panoramic window the city that he had long seen only as a life-sized monopoly board. Now he saw people, communities, lives, including two that had changed his forever. He knew that the path would not be easy. The corporate world would resist fiercely, the press would speculate wildly, the markets would react with panic. But for the first time in decades, he felt at peace with the decision. That night, he arranged a different meeting with the girl. Not in the park this time, but in a quiet cafe. Just the two of them. When she arrived, she found him reserved, almost nervous, an unrecognizable version of the arrogant man she had met at the restaurant door years ago. "I have something to show you," he said, extending a formal envelope. The girl opened the envelope with careful fingers, while the millionaire watched with the nervousness of someone submitting their soul to judgment. Inside, a set of legal documents carefully organized with a handwritten letter on top. Her eyes quickly scanned the letterhead, catching phrases: formal acknowledgement of paternity, legal rights, substantial trust fund, educational guarantees, no obligation to change current guardianship. When she finished reading, she raised her eyes to the man in front of her. No longer just the arrogant millionaire, not quite the redeemed father, but something complex in between. "This means you want to be part of his life, officially." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Yes, if you'll allow it. And yours too." The last part surprised her. She tilted her head, studying him with that penetrating gaze that always seemed to see beyond appearances. "As a stepfather," she asked, testing him, "as someone who wants to make amends for his mistakes and be part of a family he didn't know he needed," he replied, with an awkward but genuine sincerity. The girl contemplated the documents again. There was a lot there to process: complex legal clauses, financial guarantees, provisions for different scenarios. But what impressed her most was the last page. "You stepped down from the company?" The millionaire nodded. "Not completely. I'm still the major shareholder and chairman of the board, but I'm not CEO anymore, and we're restructuring the entire corporate philosophy." "Why?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Because you were right about everything." He paused, organizing thoughts that were still new to himself. About dignity, about being someone your brother can admire, about changing for real, not just for the cameras. The girl absorbed his words in silence. Had she waited for this moment, planned this transformation? The boy chatted about his school, his friends, his dreams of being an astronaut. The millionaire listened with genuine attention, as if each word was a newly discovered preciousness. Something in the scene made the girl pause, observing them. For a moment before approaching, a seed of possibility was beginning to germinate, fragile, improbable, but present. In the following week, a surprising transformation began to unfold. The millionaire, who for decades had lived exclusively to expand his empire, began to reorganize his schedule to include regular visits to the park. Initially, brief encounters, always supervised by the girl, who watched each interaction with attentive and protective eyes. For the little boy, those visits were just a new friendship, an interesting man who told fascinating stories, brought small educational gifts, and listened to him with genuine attention. For the millionaire, they were moments of rediscovery, like a man who, after long blindness, was beginning to see colors never before perceived in the world. However, two distinct realities still existed. During the day, in the parks, cafes, and museums where he met the children, he was just a man seeking redemption. At night, in his corporate empire, he remained the ruthless business titan the world knew. His advisor, after numerous frustrated attempts to understand his sudden change in behavior, finally confronted him in his office. "The board is concerned," she declared, throwing a tablet onto the table displaying headlines about his recent absence from crucial events. "There are rumors of health problems, emotional crisis, even substance abuse. The stock has dropped 3 points in the past week." The millionaire barely looked up from the documents he was reviewing. "My personal life is none of the board's business." "Your entire life is the board's business when it affects the company," she retorted, with the frankness that only years of collaboration allowed. "What's going on? Who are those children you've been seen with?" The millionaire finally looked at her, feeling the weight of the decision he needed to make. Keeping the world separate would not be possible for much longer. The truth would eventually emerge, and he needed to control how it happened. "Sit down," he instructed, closing the office door. Over the next 30 minutes, he shared the truth he had discovered, watching the advisor's expressions transition from disbelief to shock, and finally to a professional calculation of the implications. "This is explosive," she concluded when he finished. "We need to carefully plan how to manage this revelation. Perhaps a controlled announcement, a story of overcoming adversity and reconciliation, an image campaign." "No," he interrupted, surprising her. "We're not turning this into a marketing strategy." She blinked, confused. "But the press will find out eventually. The shareholders, the partners, everyone will know. We need to control the narrative." "What we need," he replied, with a conviction he didn't even know he possessed, "is to do the right thing for once." Meanwhile, at a public school in a modest neighborhood, the girl faced a challenge of her own. The guardian had called her in for a private conversation after noticing the changes in her routine. "Who is this man you've been meeting?" she asked directly, concern evident in her voice. "The other volunteers commented that they've seen you together several times." The girl hesitated. She had promised herself to protect her brother from any turmoil, but she also owed loyalty to the woman who had saved them from the streets and given them a home. "It's complicated," she began, feeling the weight of the insufficient words. "It's him, isn't it? The man from the restaurant, the millionaire from the foundation." The guardian's sharp perception was no surprise. She had always been observant, connecting dots that others ignored. The girl nodded, confirming silently. "Why?" insisted the guardian. "After everything he's done, or hasn't done." "There's more to the story," replied the girl, deciding that the moment for the complete truth had arrived. From the small cloth bag she still carried as a talisman, she retrieved the letter and the photograph. The guardian read in silence, her face gradually paling with the comprehension of the implications. When she finished, she looked at the girl with new eyes, not just as the resilient child she had taken in, but as a young woman carrying a burden much greater than anyone had imagined. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. "I promised my mother to keep this secret until the right moment, and I was afraid. I was afraid he might try to take my brother away from me if he knew." The guardian took her hands in her own. "And now? What do you want to happen?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities and risks. Even she couldn't say. When she revealed the truth, she didn't have a script in mind, only the conviction that buried truths eventually find a way to the surface. "Does the press know yet?" "Not about you. That will only happen when... and... if you're ready. But about the changes at the company, yes. The storm has already begun. The stock dropped 15% today. Some board members are threatening lawsuits." "You could lose everything," she observed. He gave a small smile, ironic but without bitterness. "That would be an interesting irony, wouldn't it? Ending up where I started." "Except you wouldn't be alone," she completed, in a tone that wasn't exactly a promise but opened possibilities. At that moment, the millionaire's phone vibrated with an urgent call. He checked the display, and his face hardened momentarily, a glimpse of the ruthless executive he had been for so long. "I need to take this. It's about the crisis at the company." The girl nodded, preparing to leave. "No, please stay," he requested, gesturing for her to remain seated. He answered the call with a brief, "I'm busy. Be direct." After a few moments of attentive listening, his face transitioned through various expressions: concern, irritation, and finally resolution. "Stay the course. We're not backing down." When he hung up, he found the girl watching him with an analytical interest. "More problems with the company?" she asked. "A group of shareholders is trying to remove me from the board," he explained, with a surprising calm for someone whose fortune was at risk. "They say I'm acting against the company's interests." "And are you?" The millionaire reflected for a moment. By the old standards, yes. By the new ones I'm trying to establish, no. This could cost you a lot of money. Almost certainly, he agreed. But I'll still have enough, more than enough. The girl considered his words, weighing them against years of distrust and the memory of that cruel laugh on the restaurant sidewalk. "What do you really want?" she asked finally, going straight to the heart of the matter. He took a deep breath, searching for words to express feelings that were still forming within him. "I want to know my son. I want to be present in his life and in yours, if you'll let me. Not to replace what you've built together, but to add something if I can. And I want—" He hesitated, searching for the exact phrase. "I want the power and money I've accumulated to serve something that really matters, before it's too late." The awkward sincerity of those words touched the girl in a way that no polished speech could have. There was a man genuinely trying to change, not perfectly, not without stumbles, but honestly. "Let's take it slow," she replied finally. "One step at a time. First, I need to talk to my guardian. She's been our family for all these years, and her opinion is important." "And with your brother?" he asked, tense. "He's not ready yet to know that you're his biological father," she replied with protective firmness. "For now, you remain just the new friend he's learning to know." The millionaire nodded, accepting the conditions without protest. Another remarkable transformation for a man accustomed to dictating the terms in every situation. In the following week, as the corporate storm intensified, with headlines about the business magnate's midlife crisis or mental breakdown discreet, meetings continued to take place in the park, in museums, in quiet afternoons where fragile bonds began to strengthen. The guardian, initially wary, gradually began to accompany some of these meetings, observing with eyes sharpened by years of social work the transformation of the man she had first known as the cruel mocker of a helpless child. "He's really changing," she commented with the girl, after a Sunday at the zoo where the millionaire had spent hours patiently answering the boy's curious questions about every animal. Or maybe he's just showing something that was always there, buried. The girl, who was now walking the delicate boundary between childhood and adolescence, carrying responsibilities much greater than her age, watched everything with a prudence that mixed hope and fierce protection. On a particularly significant afternoon, the millionaire appeared in the park without the usual gifts or elaborate surprises. He sat on the bench next to the girl, while the boy played a few feet away with other boys. "I'm giving an interview tomorrow," he announced without preamble. "I'm going to talk about the changes at the company, about my new priorities." "Are you going to mention us?" she asked, immediately alert. "Not specifically, but I will talk about how finding out I have a son changed my perspective on everything. No names, no identifiable details." She considered the proposal carefully. "Why do this now?" "Because the rumors are getting more and more absurd. Because I want to define the narrative before others define it for me. And because," he paused, searching for the right words, "because I'm proud of this change. I don't want to live two separate lives anymore." The girl watched her brother play, his laughter carried by the soft afternoon breeze. Years of care, protection, and silent sacrifice weighed on every decision she made regarding him. "Okay," she said finally, "but with conditions." "Which are?" "First, nothing that could identify me or my brother, like you said. Second, I want to approve what you're going to say before the interview. And third—" She hesitated, gathering courage for a condition she had been considering for days. "I want you to apologize publicly." "For what, specifically?" he asked, without the defensiveness that would have been automatic only weeks ago. "For that night at the restaurant, for laughing at a hungry child. You don't need to mention that it was me or the specific circumstances. Just acknowledge that there was a moment when you were cruel to someone vulnerable. and that you deeply regret it. Nein, the request hit him like a punch to the gut, not because of the difficulty of carrying it out, but because it confronted him with the raw truth of who he had been. However, he instantly understood the symbolism of that act. It wasn't just about correcting a specific mistake, but about publicly breaking with his former self. "I'll do it," he agreed, feeling the weight and the liberation of that promise simultaneously. The next morning, the exclusive interview aired on one of the major news networks. The millionaire, normally impeccable in bespoke suits, appeared in simpler attire. His face, traditionally composed in a mask of ruthless confidence, showed signs of weariness, but also a rarely seen authenticity. He spoke about the corporate changes, directly addressing the criticism. He explained the new vision that guided his decisions, without backing down from the difficult questions about the damage his old practices had caused. Then, as promised, he addressed his personal life with an honesty that shocked even veteran journalists. "I recently discovered that I have a son," he revealed, without elaborating on the circumstances. "This discovery has made me question everything: who I was, who I am, what legacy I want to leave." And finally, in the most watched and subsequently shared moment of that interview, he did what the girl had asked. "A few years ago, I saw a child begging for help on the sidewalk of an expensive restaurant. Instead of helping, I laughed. I mocked her. I turned her suffering into a joke to impress the people around me." His voice caught slightly, filled with emotions he didn't try to hide. "That memory haunts me, as should all the moments when we are indifferent to the suffering of others. I apologize to that child, although I know that words are insufficient to erase the cruelty of that moment." The interview instantly went viral. Commentators debated whether it was a marketing stunt, a strategy to distract from corporate problems, or a genuine transformation. Memes, reaction videos, and psychological analyses proliferated. But in a small house in a modest neighborhood, the girl watched with silent tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sadness or joy, but something more complex, a recognition that the past could not be erased, but perhaps could be redeemed. The guardian, sitting next to her, squeezed her hand gently. "Did you get what you wanted?" she asked softly. The girl reflected for a long moment. "I don't know exactly what I wanted when I showed him the letter. Revenge, maybe. Justice. Recognition." She paused, finding clarity as she spoke. "But now, I think what I want is simpler. A chance for my brother to have a father. And maybe a chance for all of us to have something like a family." That night the phone rang. It was the millionaire, sounding simultaneously exhausted and nervously hopeful. "How was it?" he asked simply. "It was a start," replied the girl. And for the first time since their lives had crossed on that fateful night 7 years ago, both smiled at the same time, separated by physical distance, but united by a mutual understanding that was beginning slowly to solidify into something that could, one day, transform into trust. A year had passed since that interview that had transformed the millionaire's public life and the private life of a small, unlikely family. Time, that silent artisan, had worked slowly on the fragile bonds, strengthening them without haste, testing them with challenges, cementing them with shared experiences. It hadn't been an easy path. Obstacles arose from all directions, from angry shareholders who tried to oust the millionaire from the board, to tabloids that eventually discovered fragments of the story and published sensationalized speculations, forcing the small family to deal with unwanted attention. But amidst the storms, something solid emerged. On a spring afternoon, the millionaire arrived at the modest house where the girl, now 14 years old, and her brother lived with the guardian. It was no longer a temporary residence, but a permanent home, legally guaranteed through an arrangement that the millionaire had helped formalize, respecting the established relationship between the children and the woman who had saved them years ago. The boy, now 8 years old, ran to the door, greeting him with a spontaneous hug that still surprised the man accustomed to relationships based on interest and hierarchy. "Did you bring it?" he asked excitedly, skipping around the visitor. The millionaire smiled, displaying an envelope that provoked an exclamation of joy in the boy. Inside, tickets to the city's astronomical observatory, a new passion that the little one had developed after his biological father shared with him the fascination with the universe he had maintained since his own childhood. The girl watched. The scene from the kitchen, where she was helping the guardian prepare a snack. Her eyes, which had previously scrutinized every interaction between her brother and his biological father with protective distrust, now showed a cautious tranquility. It wasn't blind trust, but a faith under construction, constantly tested and verified. "Are you two joining us?" asked the millionaire, addressing the two. "I have math homework," replied the girl. "But you guys can go. I trust you to bring him back before dinner." The simplicity of that sentence, "I trust you," carried the weight of a complete transformation. The man who had once laughed at a helpless child was now entrusted with caring for the most precious being in her life. "I won't let you down," he promised, with a seriousness that transcended the immediate situation. As they left, the girl turned to the guardian, who was smiling with a mixture of admiration and pride. "What is it?" she asked, embarrassed by the intensity of the gaze. "I'm just thinking about how extraordinary you are," replied the woman, hugging her gently. "Most adults couldn't do what you've done, transform pain into purpose, resentment into redemption." The girl shrugged, still uncomfortable with praise, but secretly strengthened by it. "I didn't do anything special, just what needed to be done." Later that night, as the boy drifted off to sleep exhausted but radiant after the excursion to the observatory, the millionaire sat in the small living room with the girl and the guardian. On the table, a folder with important documents. "The lawyers finalized everything," he explained, without the executive arrogance that had once been his trademark. "The shared custody agreement, the educational fund for both of you, the transfer of the house to your name," he added, addressing the guardian. The woman flipped through the documents carefully. After years of working with difficult social cases, she had developed a keen eye for problematic clauses. But everything seemed exactly as they had discussed, an arrangement that respected existing bonds while opening space for new ones. "What about the company?" asked the girl, who had surprised everyone by developing a genuine interest in business over the year. The millionaire smiled, impressed as always by the maturity of her insight. "It's stabilized. We lost some traditional investors, but we gained new ones attracted by the sustainable approach. The transition is almost complete." The truth was more complex, of course. His fortune had diminished considerably, although it remained greater than most people would dream of possessing. His empire had transformed, becoming smaller in scale, but more solid in purpose. The headlines that had once touted his ruthless acquisitions now highlighted social and environmental initiatives from his revamped company. "And you?" asked the guardian with the sharp perception of someone who had spent a life observing people in moments of transformation. "How are you?" The millionaire pondered the simple question that hid layers of complexity. How was he, the man who had lost so much and gained something priceless in the process? "I'm at peace," he replied finally, surprised by his own realization. "Not completely, maybe never will be, but more than I ever thought possible." The girl watched him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond words. "Do you regret it? Any of it, I mean. Meeting us, changing?" "Not for a second," he replied without hesitation. The conversation continued late into the night, navigating everyday topics, school, projects from the foundation that now effectively helped vulnerable children, small plans for the future. It wasn't a conventional family, but there was something genuine there that many traditional families never achieved. Truth, respect, and a deep appreciation of the unique journey that had united them. When the millionaire finally prepared to leave, the girl accompanied him to the door. "I've been thinking," she said, with that peculiar mixture of shyness and assertiveness that characterized her. "Maybe it's time we told him about you being, you know." The impact of those words was visible on the man's face. "Do you think he's ready? That we're ready? We'll never be completely ready for something like that, but he deserves to know the truth. And you..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You've earned the right to be called Dad." The emotion that took over the millionaire could not be quantified on any financial scale he had known in his previous life. Those simple words, the acknowledgement that he had finally earned a title that no amount of money could buy, touched him deeply. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice thick with feelings he was still learning to navigate after decades of suppressing any vulnerability. "Don't thank me yet," she replied with a small smile. "Being a real dad is just the beginning of another kind of work, one that never ends." He nodded, accepting the challenge implicit in those words. As the millionaire's car, now a more modest model although still luxurious, pulled away down the quiet street, the girl remained at the door for a moment, contemplating the starry sky that her brother so admired. Somewhere in that vastness she imagined her mother was watching, the woman who, in her last act of love, had left a legacy of truth that would eventually transform not only the lives of her children, but that of the man she never really got to know. The future still held uncertainties, of course. There would be challenges, adjustments, difficult moments. The millionaire's transformation, although significant, did not erase decades of habits and privileges. The girl's distrust, although lessened, had deep roots in the experience of abandonment. The outside world, with its voracious curiosity and hasty judgments, would continue trying to invade the safe space they had created, but there was also a silent promise that hovered between them now, to remain present, to face whatever came together, to continue learning from each other. The millionaire with his new understanding of values that money couldn't buy. The girl with her precocious wisdom about the importance of forgiveness. The boy with his ability to love without reservations. The guardian with her unwavering dedication that transcended biological ties. And on that night, as different roofs housed the members of that unlikely family, something undeniable connected them. A deliberate choice, renewed each day, to transform painful coincidences into meaningful connections, to create beauty from scars, to choose the difficult road of redemption instead of the convenient shortcuts of indifference. It wasn't a happy ending in the traditional sense. It was an honest beginning, with all the work, all the uncertainty, and all the hope that new beginnings carry. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in the millionaire's place? Comment below and share this story with someone special.